Welcome to Just Build Wealth. Patrick Menefee, thanks for coming on the show. Give us a little bit about yourself so we can start.
Yeah, Ryan, thanks for having me. Excited to be here. I could start in a lot of different directions. It's been a pivotal last year for me, but I'll just high level summary. I left my job a couple of years ago thanks to real estate and used a combination of long-term rentals, short-term rentals, partnerships, flips as well to leave my job. Since then, that was almost 2.5 years ago. Wow, that's crazy to say. Since then, I built a house flipping business, shut down a house flipping business. I bought a lawn care company, and I've most recently been focusing on, got into coaching, working with other individuals, entrepreneurs that are looking to leave their jobs, and also working with people that are looking to really work towards their vision and keep them doing work that's aligned with their vision, as opposed to just kind of going through the motions and just pursuing either money or the short-term wins. So that's the new focus as of late, that and the Short Entrepreneurs Group as well, that we can talk more about later.
Yeah. Well, I was doing some research on your background, and I saw that you were in the Army. Tell me about that experience. I'm curious, like, what did you learn in the Army that you use now?
It's funny so I was an infantryman in the Army. I did ROTC in college for 4 years, and then I was active for 6 years after that. And as an infantryman, everybody always just kind of laughs and jokes compared to other jobs, especially a lot more technical type jobs where your resume doesn't really do you much good when you leave. And I do think that, I mean, the technical skills of an infantryman, sure, but there was a lot of perseverance, a lot of problem solving. I think those two, and perspective, those three things I think are really the keys. Where perseverance, I mean, there's a lot of times that things are just not good, things are not enjoyable, things are not fun, things are not going well, and you either quit or you stick it out. And 75% of the time, quitting isn't an option either. So you just stick it out and you learn to persevere. And that also ties in with perspective of a huge benefit now is things aren't really that stressful, because what's on the line isn't really that important. Sure, there's financial security and all that kind of stuff if you're talking about lots of money in a deal that can change the course of your family's future or of their current situation. But either way, that perspective allows, I think that's something that a lot of veterans can really lean into and tap into, to say, it's really not that bad, and I can help the people around me realize that this situation really isn't that bad. We don't need to freak out about it. We can stay calm, cool, and collected. And then the problem solving piece, I mean, it's just thinking on the fly is what you do. And that's just ingrained in who you are and the actions that you take. And so that's so valuable outside that I think I take it for granted sometimes. And I think that everybody thinks that way. And a lot of people don't, because a lot of people get a deer in the headlights like when a problem comes up. So those are
I
probably the
suppose
three big
that's
things.
also the problem solving is also pretty helpful when you're trying to build a business, because that's what it's all about, problem solving, right? And perseverance and perspective. So
Yeah,
they all kind of
absolutely.
contribute.
Yeah, for sure. And then, I mean, and honestly, I had a coach that said at one point that the overextension of a strength is a weakness. And I really resonate with that a lot, because in this case, problem solving, I have like, one of my biggest strengths is that I can enter in a situation, I can just figure it out as I go. But that also, to his point, and that's the problem solving aspect. But to his point, the overextension of that strength is, a lot of times I rely on that too much. And so I don't do the preparation that I could otherwise do. So just like all things, I mean, there's balance on both sides of it, but it's really, really, really good to be able to go into anything and be confident in being able to figure it out. Also, there's plenty of times where there's a benefit to, let's slow down a little bit. Let's actually do the research and the prep ahead of time, and not just build the airplane in flight. Because I've done
What
that
was that
before.
phrase
So
again? The overextension of a strength is a weakness. Is that what it was?
yes.
Ah,
Yep.
interesting.
He just kind of dropped that one on me one day and moved on, and it stuck with me big time. So
Um, all right. Well, I want to get kind of back to those ideas, but I'm curious. I said your website mentioned that you lived in Africa and Asia, and I'm curious. I've also lived overseas, and it kind of changed my perspectives on living in the U.S. Did it have any effect on how you see the world?
technically, I mean, I only really lived there as a deployment.
Okay.
I wasn't living locally or anything like that. So it was a different perspective, but I mean, I think some of those experiences, and I also spent some time as I left the army traveling in Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think it provides, again, we keep going back to perspective, but it provides a lot of perspective on the world and on conditions and on the, I go back from time to time to just the idea of Maslow's hierarchy, where we have a huge blessing and benefit to be concerned with a lot of the problems that we're concerned with, because for a lot of the people that are over there, they don't have the luxury to be concerned with some of the things that we worry about and are mad about on a daily basis. They're just worried about surviving, and they're worried about feeding their children, and they're worried
Yeah.
about how they're going to put food on the table. So it's and they're also, in a lot of cases, you still see this genuine happiness. So it's a very interesting perspective, and also provides a lot of opportunity to learn from them, but also do good, I think, too. That's kind of a different story and different way of going about it. But
Mhm.
what about you? I mean, did you feel similar?
Well, I studied when I was living in France. I studied American politics, and it was very interesting to just see how other people view things from a politics perspective, right?
Yeah.
It always seemed like kind of this big brother, not in like the surveillance way, although that's funny, but just in like how is the U.S. reacting to this? And now I know it's because we run global security generally, and then we lived in London for 4 years, and that was we lived there from 2016, my wife and I, until 2020. And from a COVID perspective, seeing how different countries were handling COVID was very interesting, right? And how masks were distributed and how they were used. And this was before the vaccine, but like it was just interesting to see things from a kind of like an outsider's perspective. um, so it definitely affected how I view the world, because I realized how important America is on the world stage, because we've run everything for the last arguably like 75 years, since 1945, and now that's changing.
Yeah.
But anyways,
It's It's fast. I mean, when you brought that up about security, that was one of the places that I went, was in South Africa, and we were just doing a training exercise there.
mhm,
And at the time, I was young. I was 22 years old, and I didn't know the geopolitical situation really.
yeah,
But this was right before Mandela died, or shortly before, and he was sick. And
yeah,
we talked to a bunch of people in town that they were so happy that Americans were there, because they thought
uh,
there were probably 700 of us there. They were so happy that Americans were there, because they were afraid that Mandela was going to die, and that was why we came, was to help keep the peace after that happened. And that was an entire population of people that looked at us and as, these are the
mhm,
people that are here to protect us and to help us out. So it's so interesting. I mean, you hear all the negatives when you're here, and you hear negatives overseas as well, but also you see a lot of the good and a lot of the benefits as well, which the perspective, again, we keep going back to that, but the
mhm,
perspective is really, really, really beneficial in my opinion.
yeah,
So Patrick, let's shift back to kind of how your life played out. You spent the time in the Army. I'm a big believer in what you just said in terms of um, when you are put in circumstances where it's a life and death matter, the concept of making money becomes rather blasé. I can totally identify with that. But shifting back, you leave the Army, you go to work in corporate America, you're doing consulting on operating risk, on operating processes. How did that feed into what you're doing now? What did you take away from that era of your life into what you're doing now?
There were a couple things. One of them was that I wanted to get out of it. Um, the it was honestly, it was very interesting, because not knowing what I wanted to do initially, consulting was good because I got to experience a bunch of different things. And part of it was, ever since I was a kid, I knew that I was going to be an entrepreneur of some sort, and I was going to own some type of business. And so for me, consulting was a strategic move after the Army, to be able to go in and see different industries, see different processes, identify a bunch of different, and meet people and all that kind of stuff, and hopefully use that to help me figure out what the hell I want to do with my life. As I got into the weeds on these things, some of that same perspective that you were just talking about as well, the things that people got hung up on, that were preventing businesses from moving forward, were very stupid things that were typically either due to people being too siloed, too prideful, due to management structure, or any of these types of things that really weren't that important, but they would hold things up for a long time. And so I think part of the takeaway was incorporating the outside perspective and leaning on the experience of problem solving. I had no, in the areas that I was working, especially in these financial risk situations for larger banks, I had no background in that. I had no business being in that room a lot of times, but because I had an outside view and I just looked at the pieces as they made sense and as they either fit or didn't fit. And that gave me a lot of confidence moving into the business world as well, that I don't need to be and especially now as I work in coaching and helping people, I don't need to know the ins and outs of every piece of your industry. I just need to ask the bigger questions and ask the right questions. And that's where a lot of things, I think, when people get so narrowly focused, which is what I continue to see over and over in the consulting world, that laser focus prevents the perspective that allows actual progress and good things to happen. So I've tried to avoid that in my business, also incorporate some of the aspects of business that I did see that were beneficial. Because there's a big swing. I feel like, leaving corporate America, there's a big swing to, I'm going to be super independent and I'm just going to, I'm going to have the freedom to do anything that I want. And then eventually you got to kind of shift back to have some type of structure, especially as you build a team and as you've got employees and stuff like that. So combination of that, plus also leaning on a little bit of the structure that I saw and the things that worked and the things that didn't work, to incorporate those into my business too. So I know that went like 12 different directions from your initial question.
Well, I think we can kind of take it in a good direction, right? So two of the things that you've focused on in real estate are long-term rentals and short-term rentals. And I'm curious, what are like the pros and cons of each? I know that from Instagram, I've seen that you've had some challenges in both. I guess, when you're looking at a short-term rental, it's going to be, you got to find all the furniture and, you got to put it together by yourself, right? Maybe you didn't anticipate this. I don't know. What are the pros and cons of long-term versus short-term in real estate investing?
It's an interesting question right now with the market in the short-term space declining a bit. It's I think the very basic thing is you've got more upside potential of revenue with the short-term rental. You've got the opportunity to take someone, the places that we have here in Charlotte, the two short-term rentals that I have, they would both bring in between $1,700 and $2,000 a month as a long-term rental.
Yeah.
And as a short-term rental, we're bringing in on average somewhere between $3,100 to $3,700. And so now we've also got a lot of other expenses though. So that's part of the perspective and the balance and the benefit of both is on the short-term side, you have the upside if you do it right. On the long-term side, you've got the convenience of having one person and the predictability of having one person in there for the long haul. They're paying the utilities. They're, with the exception of things going sideways, like it could with anything, you've got a year's worth of income that's coming in, and that your income is going to cover your expenses if you do it, if the deal makes sense.
Yeah.
On the short-term side, you could have a great guest that sticks around for 3 months and makes a ton of money. And then the next month after that, you could have no bookings whatsoever.
Yeah.
And so, and that's kind of the irony of the algorithm with Airbnb and everything else, is that the long-term tenants are really good. The problem with a long-term tenant is that then you're not showing up in the search anymore. And so as a result, that drives down your ability to bring in shorter term people afterwards. So we had someone stay for 3 months at one that just left last week.
Yeah.
We've got one booking right now. They're in through the end of the month, and then we've got nothing for the rest of the year. So it's just there's so many ebbs and flows, and there's so many more expenses when you look at cleaning and everything else, that for me personally, looking at the time and headache of a long or a short-term rental versus a long-term rental. The only way that I think it makes sense is if you can really truly provide a much bigger cash flow, significantly larger cash flow. Because I haven't fully analyzed the return on time, but I probably 5 to 10x to my cash flow, but I far more than increased my time commitment by that much too.
So it sounds like a short-term rental is a growth stock, right? Startup versus a long-term rental. That's like GE, right? Fortune or S&P 500, just it's slow and steady versus a just roller coaster.
Yeah, that's probably fair. And you have, I mean, and then there's the midterms in the middle that are kind of that's where I want to be, and that's where
Is
I
that
want
like
to
the
transition
3 to 6 month rentals?
Yeah, and that's where you get like the travel nurses, or you get people
Yeah.
that are you get people that are insurance claims, and so they've got to be out of their house for 6 months because they're getting like the person that we've had for the last 3 months is because they had mold that they needed to get ripped out and remediated. So
It
those are
takes
the
three
best. She's
months to do
extended.
that.
Yeah,
Oh.
because they had to remediate everything, they had to test it again. So we ended up getting 4 different extensions from this poor woman.
Yeah.
But that's insurance is paying for all of it too. So there's a lot of opportunities there.
Yeah. Oh, I see. I was going to ask that really quickly, and then Dad's got another question. Is the insurance pays you then, or do they
Insurance
pay
pays them and they pay.
and then they pay you?
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So it sounds like the time management dimension between a short, intermediate, and a long term forces you to make the decision on, do I bring in a third party as a property manager, or do I just manage this myself? And that's a function of the other things you have going on in your life. Is that a correct observation?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we have on just for understanding on mine, I've got on the long-term rentals, I have property managers on all of those. On the short-term rentals, we do that. So my wife primarily manages it, and then I coordinate with contractors and stuff like that if there's repairs. But we internally do all the work for the short-term rentals. So
if you're doing short-term rentals, that pretty much becomes your day job, because hiring property manager for the short-term rental is really expensive. Whereas the long-term rentals, you're way better off if you have other activities going on, other income producing activities, to bring in a property manager, because it's a relatively small expense for long-termers. Am I on the right track with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the difference between short and long-term property management is long-term is they're taking a small piece of a smaller pie. In short term, they're taking a larger piece of a larger pie. And I mean, they're taking 20, 25% for some short-term managers. And you've got, with a long-term, you can get someone that's a really good property manager that comes in and takes over. With a short-term, if you want to provide some type of experience that differentiates you, usually you want that to be your voice as opposed to the voice of a property manager who's pumping out 1,000 rentals and you're just a number. You lose that experience factor in some cases. And so there's the experience of the guest. I mean, I can't say that based on my own experience, just because we haven't actually hired a short-term property manager, but it's kind of between the price point and that side of it. That's why we've had a hard time, even just outsourcing like the communication that takes a long time, because that's, you basically put your brand in the hands of whoever is the one communicating with the customer.
Yeah.
Right.
I think the perspective that Dad's taking here is, so he has a rental, but it's a commercial rental, kind of, right? Because it's like short term, but it's probably like medium term, because they're not like renting a hot desk for a day. They're renting an office by the month, right? So I would say that probably falls into the medium term category versus the short term category for a rental, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It sounds like that's almost a gray area of where you want to look for a property manager, because definitely for a long term, that would be something you would hand off to a property manager, versus like really short term, you want to do that yourself. But for medium term, is there like a judgment call that you make to figure out at what point do I want to hand over the keys to a property manager?
Yeah, some of it, at least in my opinion, some of it is just based on the asset class and asset quality. And
Yeah.
so when we've got when we've got a short term or a midterm rental that's a 2 to 3 month with a travel nurse or something like that,
Yeah.
like they're easy. We don't have problems. It's not worth paying someone because we barely hear from them. We get the checks every month, and
Yeah.
there's nothing to speak of. And the stuff that would come up is some type of maintenance issue that, I mean, sometimes it's just something very basic and minor, but if it's, the majority of stuff that would come up then is going to be bigger things, in which case the property manager is going to bug you about it anyway. So why are you going to pay him for it? So
Yeah.
I'm very much of the mind of, I'm all about outsourcing, and I never want to, most of my properties, I've never spoken to the tenants or done anything because it's all been through a property manager. But in some of these cases, if, I think it's hard to justify spending money on it when there's a little work that
Yeah.
you're giving up or that you're having to put into it.
One final point, and then I have another question. I think another value of having a property manager is actually in the vetting of the tenants, because in New Jersey, and I gotta believe in California, there are so many fair housing laws, and the best way to make sure that you're complying with those fair housing laws is by outsourcing it, so you don't have to let your biases influence any decisions, right? That's the job of the property manager. That makes it a lot easier in terms of just vetting things down. Or actually, if you don't want to do that, have them advise you on which questions to ask, so then you can distribute your questions evenly and fairly across all parties, right?
Yeah, that's a really good point. That is one of the main reasons that I've had property management especially some of the C-class properties, is knowing that there's a possibility of dealing with tenant problems and evictions and difficult applicants and stuff like that. Like that's not something that I want to be anywhere near, because I don't know enough to
Talk
do it. I'd
about
much rather
taking
have
up
the
some time. That's going to
Yeah.
take a lot of time.
Yeah, I'd much rather the liability fall on someone else. And even with, and I think that brings up a good point. That's the part that I kind of left out, was you can find property managers that can handle the front end and the back end. And so and maybe that's a good middle ground for something like a midterm rental, where they'll help you with marketing and they'll help you place tenants. And they'll also help you if you have to evict, and you'll probably pay a lot more for it. But they'll help on both of those ends. And so they get someone in, get someone out, and you just manage in the middle, especially if they're a relatively easy property, relatively easy tenant. And so that's another option as well. But yeah, that's a really good point. There's a lot of nuances, especially based on the state that you're in.
Yeah. It's all based on the state. Question about scaling using equity. I remember this was a few years ago that you put, this might have been the first thing I saw you post on Instagram, because Brendan Turner also reposted it, something like that, which was probably pretty cool.
That was cool.
It said you were buying something with no money down. I think you were using some partners to do that. How did that work out? If you can recall the arrangement you had with partners.
Yeah, it was the second deal I'd ever done, which came literally 7 days after the first deal. And I had gone to part of it was out of necessity. I'd been by myself in the first deal, and so most of my capital was going into that. And it was either I don't do more deals, and I'd found a really good one. It was either I don't do this deal and I pass on it, or I find a way to bring someone else in to help out with the capital. And so I ended up talking with a buddy of mine, a really good friend that I was in the Army with, and we talked through the deal. And initially I wasn't even pitching the deal to him. I was talking to him, asking him for his advice as I got ready to pitch it to someone from work. And the structure that we were talking about was the person from work was out of state, didn't know about real estate, but wanted to be invested in it. And so I wanted to make it as objective as possible. And so I said, here's 50% of the deal is going to be mine for finding the deal, for running the deal, for doing everything every day, and you never having to touch it. That's 50%. And then the other 50% is based on the amount of cash that's invested in it. And so if you, the investor, brings 100% of the cash to the table, you get 50% of the deal. If you bring 40% or 80% of the cash to the table, you get 40% of the deal. And so the percentages are where you can get subjective, but that's the way that I brought it to him. And so he ended up bringing 90% of the cash to the table. He got 45% of the deal. I brought 10%, which was $3,900, and I got 55% of the deal. And we're under contract to sell it right now. But that deal has provided me with the equity in that deal. The equity in that deal has allowed me to do 2 different flips that I profited on. And the equity allowed me to get into another 18 unit deal that I'm about to sell. And all in all, between all those deals, I added $6,000 to the 18 unit place. So all in, I've got $10,000 of my own cash, and that $10,000 is worth over $200,000 at this point.
Wow.
So
you're really able to leverage those. I'm curious, how did you find, well, this is part of a broader question, right? How do you find the partner, but also how do you find good partners in general? Like contractors are like notoriously, a good contractor is very hard to find. And if just because they're good once doesn't mean they're going to be good multiple times. How do you
yeah,
do you have like a vetting process?
there's a lot of it is on both sides. So contractors and, well, starting with contractors, I rely very heavily on references and referrals from other people that I know. And like you said, continuing to evolve that relationship, and also continuing to look outside for new, even if you've got one good person. I mean, I had a great electrician for a year, and then all of a sudden he dropped off the map and disappeared. So continuing to update that list, but a lot of it comes down to references from the work that they've done and from people that they've worked with and how easy they are to work with. A lot of it is just character and understanding, trying to get a feel for their character, which can be really hard in early conversations. So, I mean, the expertise is almost the lowest item on the list. Like
Oh, sure.
the rest of the way that they interact, the way that they're going to handle financing and money and all that kind of stuff, and the way that they're going to, I don't know, just deal with you as a human. I think all of that is a lot more indicative than just, is the craftsmanship good?
Yeah. So it's like good craftsmanship, that's table stakes, right? How can they do everything else? Because that's like the fully formed contractor, you know?
Yeah. And there's the elements of responsibility, taking responsibility for things, and being able to figure things out and not call you with every single, and obviously some of the stuff comes from just experience of working with that individual person, but are they someone that's going to figure things out, or are they someone that's going to call you the second box of screws tips over and they don't know what to do? Like that's a terrible example, but there's people that need to be handheld through absolutely every little thing.
Yeah.
So I certainly have not perfected it. It has been a constant headache, but the ones that I found that have been good, I've held on to, and I've developed and maintained that relationship. So I think that's outside of finding the goose that lays the golden egg that continues to pump out good contractors for you, is figure out how you can build a relationship and add value to the one that you have. And don't, I know there's plenty of people on like Bigger Pockets, some of those that'll talk about how you need to go in and have a firm hand as far as, stiff arming them on price or anything like that. Like I would rather start by developing a relationship with you. I want you to value me as a customer too, because especially over the past couple of years where everything has been so crazy, they don't need you. They've got a million phone calls that they're not answering.
Yep.
So what are you going to provide for them? And stop putting the emphasis on how important you are and start putting a little bit of an emphasis on them. I think that's been a big factor in maintaining relationships and growing them.
So let's shift that to the partnerships. You mentioned that that your first partnership you thought was going to be with a guy you were working with, and instead it ended up being with one of your Army buddies. Have you gone out and tried to develop other partnerships as the last couple of years have gone by with other people you just didn't know, or have you stuck with folks kind of within your periphery?
It's been a little bit of both. I've done 5 deals with partners, and they've all been with different partners. And so one of them was an Army buddy. A couple of them were work buddies. But even the work guys, I didn't know that well. But we had developed, I had started to develop a reputation based on the work that I had done and the returns that I had generated for both myself and for my partners. And so that helped, and they saw what I was doing. And so they wanted to get involved. And especially because it's real estate, and people, people want to get into real estate in some way, shape, or form. And then I had one of my partners came from the meetup that I used to host here in Charlotte. He was an out of town. He was from California, somewhere in California, and he had come out to Charlotte to look at some properties, and happened to be the weekend that I had my meetup. And he showed up, and we talked for a while, and ended up doing a deal together. Again, building that same off of the credibility, off of really that was more of a networking thing, in that fact that I created a community, and that community gave me credibility that at the time that I started it wasn't deserved, because I hadn't done anything, but it built up over time, and the reputation continued to grow. So that was, and I think that's ultimately all of the partnerships. It came down to reputation. When my army buddy invested in the first deal, I had not done anything in real estate to give him confidence that I would be good at real estate. But the rest of my life, I had a reputation with him, and he was relying on that, not on my specific industry knowledge. So that can go a long way. And you can use that for people that are just getting started. You don't need to be 18 deals in order to partner with someone. Just have confidence in yourself and work with people that can see that and that have confidence in you.
So once you found the deal, right, or once you got the partners, I'm going to say that this would be hypothetically in a linear fashion, right? You find the partners, then you find the deal, and it doesn't always work out that way. But once how did you decide on which neighborhood or which like niche to focus on?
Initially, I didn't pay as much attention to neighborhood, and maybe I should have, but my initial focus, I got into all of my first deals were in small multifamily, and
so that's like two to 4 units, something like that.
Yeah, it was 2 to 4 units. Technically, my second deal was 6 units, but it was 3 duplexes. So
okay,
I kind of just got into it out of almost necessity. I honestly, if I am 100% honest, I pulled up Realtor and realtor.com, or the app for Realtor, and I looked at Charlotte, and I was overwhelmed by how many there were, and I started trying to filter it down to see how I would get to something more manageable.
Yeah.
And eventually I got to multifamily, and I started to see that there were fewer multifamily, but the numbers looked better with them, and that made a lot more sense than trying to pick the hyper local neighborhood of a single family. So that's once I started going that route, that's what I ended up sticking with. And so the neighborhoods came into play as I did the diligence on the deal. But for me, I started with, okay, what's a property that's available around the Charlotte area? I mean, I stuck to within about an hour of Charlotte, but what's a multifamily that's on the market and available? Because all my first deals were on the market. And then once I started analyzing it, start to say, is this actually in a good neighborhood? Is it a good deal? The neighborhood came second to
the actual numbers of the deal.
Yeah.
Okay. And when you found out, so I'm thinking about, like, from my perspective, from a risk manager's perspective, I suppose, would you want to make sure that you're buying a property that's going to sell, or sorry, that's going to be rented. Would like the rental rates, would those come into your focus when you're trying to find a property?
Yeah, absolutely. Those were, and that all ties into neighborhood and everything too. But yeah, that was a huge factor. I mean, I was looking for properties that needed some work to be fixed up, or even if they didn't need an enormous amount of work, that were mismanaged, and therefore there was the opportunity to raise rents. So yeah, that was a very heavy focus, and almost a struggle initially was, how do I know what, as I'm learning analysis, how do I know what the hell a unit's going to rent for? But as I developed relationships with property managers, and had a good friend that was a realtor that I developed a relationship with, and so he would run rental comps for me as well, and using resources like Rentometer, and seeing all of these things combined, there was no one resource that I would use, but all of those together would help me get a feel for a band of what rent might go for. And then I would always run the numbers on the conservative end of that. And if they worked, then perfect. And if it went beyond that, then even better.
Do you have a situation where you bought a place and it just didn't rent for a few months, and you're like, oh my gosh, I've made a terrible mistake? Did that ever happen?
Not specifically in that. Well, I guess I had one that it took longer than expected, but that was also during COVID. But the more recent version of that was the 18 unit place that I bought. We had a bunch of units we had a couple of people that were already leaving as I took over ownership, and then we had a couple more that we let go. And the problem came from, it's a small market, and we flooded the market with 5 rentals at the same time. And so as a result, the first couple filled rather quickly, but there just weren't 5 people that needed apartments all at the same time because it was a small market. So that was kind of the, oh shit, we've got, I'm sorry, I don't know if I can say that.
You can say whatever you want.
Okay. We've got 3 units that are sitting here unrented, and I started to worry a little bit. They ended up getting rented, but we dropped the price on 2 of them a little bit. So
Okay, I guess that's just kind of risk management is not only like looking at does this area work? Will it rent? But it's also like managing your own expectations. Be like, you know what? If it doesn't rent out, it's okay. You got a little buffer. I guess you got to build in a buffer just in case.
yeah.
But it's like it's training yourself mentally to do that.
Well, and I love that you said risk management in that case too, because there's so many. I think a lot of times, especially when people get started, they get very focused, singularly focused on one thing or the other. And you've got to take a kind of a global picture of it. If you've got, if you take into account vacancy when you're running your numbers, that's one side of it. If you take into account, if you run the numbers on, like I said, for mine, I would look at, if the band of rent looked like it was between $700 and $1,000, I would run the numbers at typically 700 to 750. We'd go to list it at 850, 900, or we'd lean into the market, and then you've got room to move. So you can, risk management comes in a lot of different forms, but it's really having a big picture of everything and saying, how does this all fit in? What tools do I have at my disposal? How can I, adjust here? Does it make more sense to keep it on the market for the next 2 months until I get $800, or does it make more sense to drop it to 750 and get it leased out tomorrow?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of, there's so many factors that you can take into consideration.
Yeah. Are there any like sunk costs that people don't realize when they're trying to invest in real estate, like unexpected sunk costs?
I think, well, I guess by nature, a sunk cost is something that has already happened. But I think where I've run into this is once you've gotten into a deal, a lot of times people, and let me know if I'm taking this a different direction, you want to go a different way, but the way that I've treated this in the past is you've got X number of dollars into a due diligence deposit, you've got money into inspections, you've got money into whatever it may be, an appraisal, who knows. If the deal, like if you do all of that and the deal doesn't work out, that money is gone. You're not getting it back, whether you close on the deal or not. So don't buy a garbage deal because you've got a couple $1,000s into it. Like don't continue to lose more money simply because you already lost some. Just cut bait and get out. And I think that's where, the last flip that I got under contract for to buy was last May, and I had a $5,000 deposit with the wholesaler. And between stuff going on in the market and some of the risk, like that was as interest rates were increasing and all, like everything combined, and I had money into the inspections, and I walked away from it and said, I don't feel good enough about the direction that the market is going right now to feel confident in this deal. So that $5,000, that's already gone. I don't care.
Yeah.
And I think that's where a lot of people get hung up, and they would get into that deal. And then as a result of fearing the loss of $5,000 that's already gone, they then lose $20,000 on the flip, and it takes 6 months of their time.
So I guess don't let pride overtake getting a good deal or getting out of a bad deal.
Yeah. Yeah. And don't be afraid to get out of a bad deal.
Yeah.
So, Patrick, I think above and beyond the real estate side, there's also been some small business acquisitions. I think you mentioned a gardening or a lawn mowing business. How did that happen? I mean, you're in one area and then you pick up something in an entirely different area. Give us the backstory on
that. The full backstory, and I won't go into excruciating detail, but I mean, the full backstory goes back to when I was a kid, and I knew that I wanted to be an entrepreneur in some way, shape, or form. And so it was a matter of trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And so to take it, I'll come back to the specific technicalities of why I got into the lawn care side in a second. But really, for me at that time, it was more of a defining me question, trying to figure out where I wanted to go, because I had felt kind of lost with flipping. I wasn't enjoying. At the time I had just kind of shut down my flipping business. I wasn't enjoying it. It was a little bit after this deal that I was just talking about. It wasn't really fulfilling, and I just didn't like where I was going. And so I was in the process of pivoting. And I think a lot of that came from the fact that my entire adult life, leading up to the time that I quit my job after having the rentals and everything, my entire pursuit had been towards creating financial freedom for myself. And so when I realized that financial freedom, at least the basic level that allowed me to quit my job, I no longer really had a purpose that I was working towards. And so then it was more of the challenge of the business or anything else. And so at the time, I was building a flipping business that I never really wanted to build a flipping business, but my competitive entrepreneurial nature took over. And I was like, well, I'm already flipping houses, so I might as well build a business out of it. And so all that to say, after all that, I started to realize that I needed to pivot, started doing a lot of work on figuring out what I wanted to do, and started to transition into larger multifamily, because that was when I bought that 18 unit place and thought maybe I'd go that route. Started to shift away from that, realized as I was going down that route, someone introduced the idea. I was at a conference, and someone that was also in real estate talked about, just casually mentioned that they just bought 2 landscaping companies. And I was like, oh, you can just buy a company? Like, you can do that? And so I started looking into it a little bit. I got intrigued after that weekend. And then about a week later, I was on a call with one of the other groups that I'm in, and they were talking about business acquisition. I was like, well, apparently something is speaking to me that I should look into this. And so I chose the lawn care company because I wanted something that was going to be relatively recession resistant. And I wanted something that didn't have a very high barrier to entry for my skill level and knowledge level. And I wanted something that was going to be easy enough to find talent that I could replace the owner and the operator and not have to step into it myself. And so with lawn care, I mean, the worst case scenario, if everybody quits, you just jack up the amount that you pay someone, and you go pick up someone else to cover the gap until you get someone else in. So it felt to me, lawn care was a relatively lower risk operation that also had the opportunity to grow a lot, and it didn't have had the lower barrier to entry, but also it has a relatively low barrier to being very successful, because a lot of people that do it, I mean, it's kind of like the concept of the E-Myth. A lot of people that are doing it did it just because they're into landscaping and lawn care and they like that, but they can't run a business. And so if I can run the business side of it and I can provide the things that they can't, now I can create something out of it. So that was ultimately, that's my really long answer as to why I got into lawn care, but it was a long process of just pivoting in general, and then realizing that big business acquisition was a really fun way to go about becoming a business owner in a different sense.
Yeah. So I was on your website again, and I was noticing, and maybe this comes out of all the things you've learned up until now. I saw that there are 4 pillars that you've outlined. What are those pillars?
You're testing me here.
I can edit it, so you can go to the website and pull them up. No, I just want to make sure you can highlight them,
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Yeah, they're the 4 things that I've found to be more and more important to me. One of them is generating wealth, and along the line of generating wealth is not just for myself, but helping other people do it through education, through partnerships, through whatever else. That dives a lot deeper than the generating wealth moniker. So I'm kind of diving deeper in that and evolving those pillars, but that's one. One is helping others, both in the community and really just in everyday interactions and the people that I work with. And so having that be a constant thing, I think for me, I had this perception of I was going to do well in business so that in the future I could make this impact. And my shift over the past year has been, forget that. How do I make the impact now continually? And then I can just continue to make a bigger impact in the future. It's like the idea of money. People talk about how if you can't manage your money when you're making $10,000, how are you going to manage your money when you make $1 million? The same thing applies to your time and to giving and to making an impact in my mind. Those are 2. Improving daily has been a huge pillar for me over the past year as I've dove really hard into personal development and my own working with a coach. And so I think it's so important to never settle where you're at and to always be working towards something bigger, something better, and the next best version of yourself. And the 4th one is having fun. I mean, it's funny because my coach is the one that identified this for me, but I would continue to bring this kind of stuff up. And you can see behind me in the video, I've got Lego helmets, Lego Star Wars helmets up there. And that just became important to me. It's in business, having fun while doing it. Doesn't need to be not everything needs to be a grind. Not everything needs to be, like the army, painful suffering. Like
Sure.
you can have a good time doing this.
If
And
not, then
that's how
what's the point,
yeah, exactly. And that's part of the, celebrating some of the little things. And like I had a deal that sold last week that was by far the worst deal of my life. I lost more money in that deal than I could even imagine. And
I saw the
it's
Instagram story about it. Oh,
rough, really rough. It was, and for the listeners, I lost $200,000 in that deal over the course of 2 years.
oh,
And a combination of just everything that you learn not to do when you listen to like Bigger Pockets. I did every one of those, even though I knew better. So, but anyway, that was, to the idea of having fun. That was such a big lift for me when I sold it and I finally got this horrible deal out of my life, that I went and bought a Lego set, and that like I bought R2D2, and that
that's
was,
great.
I said that it's silly, but also at the same time, that is a big celebration. Even though I lost a bunch of money, I'd already lost that money last year. So at this point, it's a celebration that I no longer have this hassle and this headache, and I'm going to celebrate it, and I'm going to have a little bit of fun. So
That's great.
Hey, Patrick, very briefly, because we're running out of time, can you give us some sense of your coaching business? What are the economics? Who are you coaching? Give us a little bit of maybe 2 or 3 minutes of color on that.
yeah, it's been last year after I sold one of my deals. I got into, I started talking a lot about the coaching work that I was doing with my coach. And I had a guy reach out to me and say, "Are you coaching people too?" And I said, "No." And he asked me if I'd coach him. And so that was my intro into it. And he was also a veteran that was working at Bank of America and wanted to leave his job and was in real estate. And so I have been helping him through the process. And so what the business, as I've decided that I wanted to grow it, and as I felt more passionate about it and realized that's where I feel like I'm meant to be, I focus on working with entrepreneurs and either aspiring entrepreneurs or newer business owners that are, maybe they're looking to leave their job, maybe they have gotten started and they left their job, but they're trying to figure out where they want to go. And it's really, there's the nuts and bolts side of it, which is, that's kind of the easy piece. And you can go anywhere and you can learn, especially with real estate, you can learn about the technical aspects of it. But where I really want to help people and where I focus in on now is, let's make it more values-based and vision-based, as opposed to just outcome-based that's financially related. And that's all tied back to my story of getting to that point of leaving my job and not having a purpose anymore for why I was doing what I was doing. So I want to help entrepreneurs and business owners shift from just thinking about what's the number that I need to get to for financial freedom, or what's my financial target for my business, or what's my exit strategy for my business. Have that be more of a, like, that's just one piece and that's one milestone in the entire process, which is, okay, where am I actually trying to go and how does this business help me get there? So that's what the business is about, and that's what I'm working, and that's who I'm working with, really.
Yep. Perfect. I'm really enjoying this. It's good to hear your perspectives on these things because, we're right in the middle of it. I'm building a couple businesses, so it's interesting to hear that, and honestly, when you mentioned the fourth pillar, which was have fun, I think it's crucial to do that, right? But also, like, I kind of gravitate towards things that are oddly painful. I don't know if you can see these in that maps over my head.
Yeah.
I've done 3 Ironman triathlons, right? Those are really long, painful races. The third one, I just did it in like September, so I haven't gotten the map for that. But I oddly gravitate towards painful things. But at the end of the day, I want to have fun too, right? And I have fun in like optimizing the training and stuff like that, and like finishing each workout, because you got to have fun at the end of the day. You got to have a vision, but you got to have fun, because if not, then like, what's the point?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can put your head down, even with a vision, you can put your head down and drive towards the vision and never look up and appreciate why you're doing what you're doing in the first place. So
it's 100% true. Now I also noticed on your bookshelf several books, so I think our final 4 questions will be perfect. And I have a book recommendation for you if you're interested in like geopolitics.
Absolutely.
It's not like personal growth or anything. It's maybe you've heard of this guy, but I'll get to that in a sec. The first question is what is your favorite nonfiction book, or maybe it's a reference or a media or a blog post, maybe like a Netflix documentary that has guided your thinking?
Can I give you 2?
Yeah, I
Achieve?
might have them on my bookshelf. I'm not sure. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. So one of them is Tribe of Millionaires. I
Oh,
know when we were doing the accountability group back in the day, I talked about that one a lot.
okay.
But it was created by the or written by the guys that founded Go Abundance,
Yeah, okay.
which is the community of,
That's David Osborne, right?
yeah, David Osborne, Tim Road, Pat Hyben.
Hmm.
So they wrote a book, and it's written as a story, as a fiction story,
Mm.
and the story takes you through really the pillars of community and the pillars of having accountability and having people around you that are going to push you to be the best version of you, and
Hmm.
also incorporate into that having fun and having adventures and really just living a full life. And so with Go Abundance, they talk about the idea of being a whole life millionaire,
Hmm.
and the Tribe of Millionaires is that idea, and they call themselves the tribe. But that book is a really good intro lesson and story for people that have never been around that before. And it really leans into the importance of being around amazing people that are going to truly deeply care about you and also help you to get where you're trying to go and hold you accountable to it.
Hmm. Okay, so that's one.
That's one. Second
Yeah.
one is a book that not I don't think a lot of people have heard of it, but it's called The Slight Edge.
No.
Heard of that
Oh,
one?
I thought you were going to go with Turning Pro by Stephen Pressfield.
I do like that one a lot.
It's such a good book. Okay,
I
so
just re-listened to that for the fourth time.
it's so good.
That's so good. Why
So
that is a number three.
yeah, yeah. So you said A Slight Edge.
The Slight Edge, yeah,
Slight Edge.
it has similar undertones as the Compound Effect. I mean, the idea is pretty much the same.
Yeah.
The Slight Edge was the first one that I stumbled into before Compound Effect, but basically it's the idea that the little things that you do every day are what separate success and failure. It's not
Hmm.
about one big thing, it's about the little habits on a daily basis. And so
Who's it
that the
by?
reason that book is so big, what's that?
Who's it by?
Jeff Olson, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. And for me, that book was a turning point, because the whole reason that I started my shift was I got into more of a personal development right around my 30th birthday, and that book was the catalyst for me. I started digging into that, and that's what started the habits going, and that's what kind of led to the snowball. So
Hmm.
really, really, really good book.
Okay. So we had Tribe of Millionaires, The Slight Edge, Turning Pro for a close third. Here's one for you. Um, this is about geopolitics. Have you heard of a guy named Peter Zion?
I think I've heard the name.
Oh man, changed my view of politics. It's called, well, he has a bunch of books. The first one was great. It's called The Accidental Superpower. And if this is like a refreshment from personal development stuff, because it just puts the world in a different perspective. And then his most recent one is called The End of the World is Just the Beginning, which again really makes you think about where the US sits in the world and how all the other countries are. We're trying to create new world orders right now, right? Especially with what happened last year with Ukraine and Russia. It's insane.
Yeah.
And as somebody that you were in the army, so you understand like how the US kind of has all these bases everywhere and like why those exist. It's very, very interesting. So that's my recommendation to you.
Okay.
I would start with the first one. The
Okay.
or he's got a lot of videos on YouTube. Any
Okay.
one of the speeches he gives, they're like probably an hour. They're a very good primer on how we got to where we are. It's so good.
Okay.
Next
Interesting.
next question. Sorry, we're still in the final four. Tools that you love. We ask this question and people say things like LinkedIn or Calendly or Asana, like project management. So those are the kind of things that we've received, or like ideas we have. But are there any tools that you use in your business that you're like, I love this thing. Everybody should be using it.
There's I don't know if this is on the same line, but my iPad
Oh
with
yeah.
a pencil, and people use the Remarkable for the same thing, but
Oh,
my iPad with a pencil and the Good Notes app
good
is
notes.
Good Notes, GOODNOTES. I
Hmm.
use it for everything. You can organize it just like a Google Drive folder or something like that has
Yeah.
different folders and different notebooks and all that kind of stuff. You can download contracts and so that you can sign from it and then upload it and export it and send it. But it's just it's so valuable to me that I carry my iPad with me almost everywhere, and I have
Hmm.
it on. My screen time on my iPad is outrageous because I use this constantly. So
What's your screen time? Well, I think for my iPhone, it's probably like 4 hours a day, but that's because I listen to a lot of stuff on it, right?
yeah,
Do you know what your
my
screen time?
iPad sits open for over 6 hours a day usually.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But it's, the whole time that we've been talking, I've had my
Yeah.
iPad up
It's just
with
open,
like notes on.
just
Yeah,
just in
it's just like a
case.
notebook.
Yeah, yeah.
I've
Okay.
got sitting over there, I've got, I don't, you probably, yeah, that corner right there.
Yeah.
That's all notebooks because I used to be a paper notebook guy.
Oh, okay.
But then, you carry notebooks everywhere and you've got a dozen of them and you can't find where you had notes from one particular day.
Yeah.
This, I've got them all in here.
Hmm.
So
Okay.
it's
So
a
the
great tool.
iPad with notes. That's cool.
And the pencil's huge.
Oh, this is the Apple Pencil.
Yep.
It sounds like this is the newer version.
Yeah. I
Okay.
had the old iPad that didn't have the pencil and I never used it. And the second I got the one with the pencil, I have used it probably every day almost
It's
since.
funny, right? Steve Jobs was like, "We're never gonna get a stylus," and then people like they swear by the stylus now.
Yeah. People will use the remarkable as the other one. People will use that for
Mhm.
the same purpose. And it's great. And I've to take it one step further, if you're gonna do it, there's a screen protector
Yeah,
that writes like paper. And
yeah,
so you're not getting like the pencil writing on the glossy
yeah, yeah, yeah.
screen. You're
You
writing
need the
on,
like the traction or like what's it called? The
yeah,
friction,
yep,
the friction of the screen. Okay.
yep. Well worth it.
What's your favorite thing to do outside of work?
I have a 20-month-old daughter, so
Oh
spending
yeah,
time with her and with my
yeah.
wife, um, that's
She's
where,
walking, right?
yeah, she's running everywhere. It's ridiculous,
We
running
have
up
a
and
we have
downstairs.
an 8-month-old, and
Oh,
she can't walk yet. And half
enjoy
of me
it.
is like, yeah, right. Half of me is like, oh, once you can, it's gonna be hard to like just stay there because
Yeah.
she does right now. But I think
Is she
once that
crawling?
happens, no, she's not crawling yet. I don't know if she's close. She can roll over. She's like big. She's like 20 pounds. She's 28.5 inches. So she's like tall.
Okay.
She's a big baby. So she doesn't like want to turn over a lot.
Yeah.
But anyways, I can totally understand like that takes up so much time and it's so much fun, right? You go to the park, they love the swings. She hasn't
It's
seen bubbles yet, but
Oh man, yeah. My daughter now won't stop anytime she sees bubbles, and so we have to tell her that the bubbles are sleeping sometimes, so that she'll let the bubble machine sit there. But enjoy the lack of mobility because we're now on 24/7 watch of where is she going, what is she climbing over, what's she
yeah.
jumping off
Does
of,
she
and it's
does she
nonstop.
does she climb out of her crib?
No, she hasn't. It's low enough that she hasn't yet. But
Yeah.
she, at this point, she'll walk up and down the stairs and she will refuse. She'll get mad at us if we try to help her. So
Oh. Yeah, you know what? I feel like that's in my future too. She doesn't
yeah.
like her hands being held. If you like try to
Mm,
hold her hand, she's like, no, I'm doing this on my own. I'm like, I want to have
I'm a
my own
big girl.
spoon. Yeah.
I don't need your
So
help,
funny.
Dad.
Yeah. All right. So that's a great thing to do outside of work. How can people find you?
I am probably most active on Instagram.
Okay.
It
Yep.
is the Patrick Menefee. Also, if you know the guy that has just Patrick Menefee, let me know because I want it. But
Okay. Yeah.
I'm
Now
the Patrick
us
Menefee on
people with
Instagram.
like common names need to be more creative.
Yeah, I know. I used to be Invest DGP and I decided now that I've been doing more coaching work, I decided it was time to put my name on it instead.
Okay.
So the Patrick Menefee, that's too long for Twitter. So on Twitter, it's Patrick Menefee 8. And
Oh.
then my website is investdgp.com.
Mm,
Eventually that'll switch over to patrickmenefee.com, but go to investdgp.com no matter what, and it'll get you there.
perfect. All right. Well, we have covered a lot of ground. We'll make sure that we put all the books and ideas we had in the show notes. But Patrick Menefee, thanks for coming on Just Build Wealth. It was great talking to you. Hopefully, we'll do this again in a few months. And who knows? Maybe when I come down to North Carolina, we can meet up.
Let's do it. Let's
Yeah,
do it. It's been long enough.
it's been a long time. Cool. Well, I'll let you go, but this has been a great chat. Thanks so much for coming on, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Okay. All right. Talk to you later, man.
All right, man. See ya.
Bye bye.